Good morning. I'm meteorologist Cheetah Craft, and here is a full check of now Hurricane Ian. So Ian was upgraded this morning at 4 a.m. to a Category 1 hurricane. On the satellite imagery, you can see how broad that circulation is. And now, notice how we are starting to get a more defined eye with Ian. So maximum sustained winds at 75 miles per hour. It's moving northwest around 14 miles per hour. Already the outermost bands of these feeder bands impacting Cuba, and not only Cuba, but already some of this tropical moisture starting to impact southern Florida as well. And this is where we're really going to shift our eyes and take our focus. Already there have been watches and warnings issued, not only along, of course, the Cuba coastline with a hurricane warning you can see, but a hurricane watch just for Tampa was issued as well. So again, a heads up to all of Cuba and into Florida over the next 3 to 4 days. We are going to monitor a very potentially serious, life-threatening situation. We are expecting intensification over the next 12 to 24 hours, and let me show you why. First, going over these sea surface temperatures surrounding Cuba. Notice upper 80s, potentially maybe even close to 90 degrees there, hugging the Florida coastline, just about the same. And then right when you get a little bit closer, not only to Tampa and potentially the Florida Panhandle there and towards Cedar Key, that's when the water temperatures drop by just a degree or two, so more mid to upper 80s range. Now let's look at some of these wave heights surrounding Cuba right now, where basically the center of circulation is continuing to travel northward. Some of these wave heights are measuring anywhere from 16 to upwards of 22 feet. So again, really serious storm surge, life-threatening storm surge and winds associated with Hurricane Ian right now. Now the latest track from the National Hurricane Center, this is just in at 7 a.m. this morning, still has maximum sustained winds at 75 miles per hour, still moving in a northwest direction around 14 miles per hour. But the rapid intensification is expected to happen today. So over the next 12 hours, from let's say 7 a.m. this morning through 7 o'clock this evening, we are going to see Ian probably pick up from a Category 1 to a 2, and potentially this evening even have a major hurricane. When you hear that term major, that means Category 3 or higher, and that is where the life-threatening storm surge and winds will be a threat to western portions of Cuba. This track stayed just the same from earlier this morning as well. So it does look like a major hurricane expected to impact the westernmost portion of Cuba. That's why they're already under a hurricane warning. You can see shaded there in that purple. And then notice once Hurricane Ian moves to the eastern portion of the Gulf of Mexico, it's then expected to increase to a Category 4 hurricane. So still at major status, but growing in intensity. Remember those sea surface temperatures that I just showed you? Upper 80s, nearing 90 degrees. So really, really warm water temperatures, low wind shear, not much getting in the way for this thing just to take off. So between, let's say, early tomorrow morning through Wednesday morning, so all of Tuesday should be sitting in the open waters of the Gulf of Mexico, getting into Wednesday afternoon, and that's when it's expected to hug the Florida coastline a little bit. That's when we will also start to see these tropical storm warnings to the hurricane watch that's in effect upgraded. So this is what we're going to be monitoring through Wednesday. Then as it starts to hug potentially either Tampa or again closing in Cedar Key towards the Florida Panhandle, and anytime that you see this cone of uncertainty from the National Hurricane Center, don't forget this could be either further east or further west. So we still have to watch and monitor the exact location where we're expecting landfall. But at this point, if it does move just north of Tampa, it'll move into those slightly cooler water temperatures. Remember how I was showing you those mid 80s, maybe a little wind shear, and that's why maybe it weakens just a little bit before landfall. But either way, we're going to be dealing with a very serious situation. The east side of a hurricane or an area of low pressure is the dirty side that packs more of the punch. So Tampa is going to be dealing, and pretty much all of central and south Florida, with hurricane force winds, storm surge. Those are the preparations that are in place. All of the western coast coastline there of Florida, preparing for major hurricane strength conditions as we head into midweek this week. Look at this timeline, then getting into early Thursday, and that's where we're potentially expecting landfall. So anytime between Wednesday to maybe even early Friday morning, as long as Hurricane Ian sits in the open waters of the Gulf, it could hold its intensity, and then once it hugs the Florida coastline, especially the further north it travels, maybe it weakens just a little bit. But all of that to be said, take a look at some of the rain estimates that we're expecting to see. Western portions of Cuba could be looking at 7 to maybe upwards of a foot of rain, and that's over a really short period of time. Don't forget, with that track, you saw it making landfall potentially late this evening or early tomorrow morning, and then continuing to move back into the open waters of the Gulf. So this swath of extremely not only heavy rain, storm surge, and the winds will then travel north of, and expected to start to impact South Florida today through Wednesday, even though we're not expecting landfall in South Florida. Take a look at some of these rainfall estimates here, between 4 to maybe a foot of rain once you head more inland to central and even North Florida. And that does depend on exactly the location of landfall. But just to give you a general idea here, Western Cuba into Florida bracing for a very serious situation. Now, across southeast Texas, we've all been tracking a cold front. This cold front is impacting all of southeast portions of the United States, and it's also going to be impacting the timing and intensity of what Hurricane Ian could be. So watch how this comes into play as this boundary, this cold front, is draped across the southeast. Ian is continuing to work northward. Now, these are the latest model runs. Again, I think we need to get into tomorrow to Wednesday to know the exact timing, location, if this front makes it as far south as, let's say, the upper portions of the Panhandle. But either way, this is going to help deflect and steer and keep Ian a little bit longer in the Gulf in those open, really warm water temperatures. And then as this comes together, that's what's really going to probably draw in or close off that exact location as far as landfall goes. So I'll show you the latest track one more time here, since we are doing a live stream for you, so you can see not only Hurricane Ian, but the well-defined eye. That cold front is actually going to drop the temperatures across southeast Texas. So that's the good news with the cold front. But the latest satellite image with Hurricane Ian, you start to see that really defined eye, and they noticed that earlier. So satellite imagery getting really impressive. All the warm water temperatures and hurricane warnings there already in place for Cuba. Hurricane watch already in effect across portions of Tampa and just south of. And that's all because we're expecting this rapid intensification, this strengthening of Hurricane Ian. Water temperatures in the upper 80s, closing in on 90 degrees, with the exception there of the Panhandle and from Cedar Key into Tampa. Wave heights measured between 16 to maybe 22 feet, closing in on Cuba. And the latest track has it strengthening to a major Category 3 hurricane. Today, potentially by this evening or early tomorrow morning, making landfall in the western portions of Cuba, and then strengthening into a Category 4 before making landfall again right along the Florida coastline. So still a lot to monitor. You can continue to check in for updates. I'm meteorologist Cheetah Craft, continuing to monitor Hurricane Ian.